Good evening. I'm Susan Ashbaker, the director of the Cooperative Program, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening. The end of the first week, when our class is over tonight, it's the end of the first week. This is the sixth master class they've had, the fourth one that is public, and I'm super proud of all the work, the hard and good work that everybody has done. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jay Carter. He's not only a wonderful voice teacher on faculty at Westminster Choir College, but he's also a well-regarded and esteemed singer. He's a countertenor. And you think, oh, countertenors always sing early music. And that's not really the case. He sings early music and he sings contemporary music and everything in between. But I have to say, when I heard him sing, I guess it was a convocation after he'd been here for a year. He's been here now 2 years. It was some of the most stunningly beautiful singing I have ever heard. So musical, what a beautiful tone. And so you are in wonderful hands tonight with my wonderful colleague and friend, Dr. Jay Carter.
Thank you, Susan, and it's good to see all of you. I've gotten to know some of you through lessons this week, and some of the rest of you through the lunch cohorts, and it's a little overwhelming to see you all on my screen at the same time, but still a good thing all at the same time. Welcome. Three of you are going to sing tonight, and I think what I'd like for us to do is to do some singing and some chit chat back and forth, and then we might talk about a couple of things in between the singers. Um, my goal, and I don't know at what point I became regarded as a specialist. It happened while I wasn't looking. But at some point, I guess I became somebody who did this, and this was one of the things that I do. Uh, but I arrived at this conclusion by being a generalist as a singer and as a scholar, and my interests are very mainstream. And it just so happens I went down a dark alley about 20 years ago, and I still haven't managed to make it all the way back to go down all the other dark alleys that I've found in my work and in my career. Um, but the exploration of this repertoire, I've come at it from the viewpoint of not having a great deal of background in it. I did not grow up in a men and boys choir. I did not grow up exposed to Baroque opera or the works of Barbara Strozzi. I was lucky if I heard anything beyond Johnny Cash growing up. My background in this is not. This is something I've come by because it's been of interest to me, and I've had to kind of scrape my way along, asking questions that some people probably are smart enough that they wouldn't have to ask them about this repertoire and about the performance of this. So if nothing else, I hope for you to give yourself permission to look at this repertoire and to explore it from the vantage point that you have wherever you are on your musical development. And if you are a Mahler fan, there's wonderful early music for you to be doing. If you're a Puccini fan, there is wonderful early music for you to be doing. But please don't think there's some barrier to entry here that you must eschew everything written after 1800 or something like that. This is general repertoire, and it's increasingly becoming expected that singers are well acquainted with it. The days of making it through your whole career without singing a Monteverdi opera are probably long gone. So I think it's good to embrace this repertoire and to figure out what it's like to sing it with your voice and with who you are as an artist. I'll probably say more about that as we go on, but it's time to hear somebody sing. If I remember right, someone is singing Barbara Strozzi tonight, and I have lost the little tab on my window that tells me who is singing when. But remind me who's singing Strozzi tonight.
That would be me.
There you are. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin you to my display, and would you just go ahead and give us a sing through it, and let's all listen and see what sorts of trouble we can find to get ourselves.
All right.
One, two.
Son tanto, son tanto ecco cercando, che pur hai
Nicely done, Karina.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thank you.
In the interest of full disclosure, we have worked with each other a few times this week, but we have purposefully steered clear of this piece and working on this piece and talking about these things. I didn't want this to seem in any way contrived, like she was going to be doing things because I'd asked her in advance to do them. I'd much rather work from kind of a fresh palette. So Karina and I both solemnly swear we've not worked on this piece together at all, and so what you're getting is kind of fresh out of the gate. Karina, nice work. Um, I think it would be helpful at this point if I were to very briefly say something about the score that you're working from. I think I can share screen. I may not be able to do that or not. If it might be permitted to give me the ability to share the screen, I want to show you the score that she's working from, if that's possible. Here we go. And I'll just share the whole screen for just a moment. Oh, goodness. Now everything has popped up on the screen. We'll be right there. There we are. And as you can see, you don't even have to see the whole thing. You can see that the amount of material that is on the page is very, very concerning if you're a person that likes to have a lot of material to tell you what to do as a singer and as interpreter on the page. What's there is a bass line and a vocal line. There aren't even those, you remember those figured bass things that you had to do in theory class and you had to realize them and turn them on and you'd get your page back in theory and it was all marked with red ink for all the voice leading rules that you'd broken when you realized the figured bass. It doesn't even have the guidance of those Roman numerals in front of it to tell you what mistakes you should be trying to make in the first place. So there's very little material on the page. It's a bass line with an accompaniment that's improvised and a vocal line. As far as ingredients go, it's not a lot, and it's about as natural and organic as anything you could ever find as a piece. That might be absolutely petrifying to some of you. I know it was to me when I first started looking at this repertoire. I said, I have no idea what to do with this. And I asked my teacher when I was an undergraduate about it, and he kind of guffawed out loud in his jocular baritone fashion. He says, well, go make something out of it. And so I did. And, you know, the first couple of attempts were pretty wretched, I'm sure. I'm glad they're not preserved for the record, that they're, you know, out there swimming around in the ether. But what this music requires that you do is that you take these very raw ingredients and that you try to make something out of it. And that in and of itself is a wonderful exercise in growing your own sense of musicianship. And what you can hear is that Karina is doing some things right out of the gate that seem natural and instinctual. She's got a number of long-held notes. And in those long-held notes, she's like, I have to do something with them. And she's generally crescendoing or decrescendoing or putting a messe di voce over the long notes. Those are all natural things that it makes a lot of sense to do right from the very beginning. Let's go back and sing just the first strophe, if we could, Karina.
Yes.
And I want you to continue to do those kind of dynamic things that you're doing. I would encourage you to be to paint with a broader palette of colors, especially since it's the second time through and you've made it through and everything's fine and you know everything's going to be okay. I think risk a little bit more on those shapes. If you think something needs a sense of crescendo and decrescendo, I would say do it and do it in such a way that it's clear even to the person in the back of the room that may not be paying attention and may still be leafing through the program notes. So that they can hear it too. You can be a little bit more straightforward about it. The other thing I would encourage you to do just in this first strophe, and we'll probably go back and find more specific things, is when the text is repeated, and there's a lot of repeated text, you have to begin thinking of some sort of rhetorical reason for the repetition to have occurred. And it doesn't have to be something that we know about as the audience. You just have to know about it, and we'll provide our own framework for it. That's one of the beautiful things about this kind of music. It's kind of left up to the audience's mind. All you have to do is make the implication, which is probably stronger than any long, you know, program note would ever be. So could we do that first strophe? And I'm really interested in hearing the shape on duramente, which I'll let you translate that word in your own head and try to figure out a way of making that word duramente. and then the tanto, tanto, tanto. I think if you'll try to find a reason for that tanto to be repeating itself, and it needs to go somewhere dramatically on each repetition, and it need not move in a straight line. Be experimental with it, and let's see what happens. Would you take us through that again?
Yeah, absolutely.
One, two.
Son tanto, 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 son tanto io cercando.
And I said I wasn't going to stop you this quickly, but I am going to stop you this quickly. That's teachers, we lie. I'll let you go all the way through before I stop. That we almost never let you do that. You already began to do things with the tantos, and the repetition of them began to go somewhere. The one to me that seemed the most interesting and drawn out was the one that happened after your little burble that happened, and it was the last one, in the second bar. Tanto. That one really had some grit behind it, and I liked that a lot. Once you've done all the tanto that you can possibly stand and maybe paid it all up in that second bar, I think when you come back in after the comma, son tanto ito cercando, can you make that one move a little bit more deliberately toward cercando? Now,
Okay.
obviously, your virtual theorbo player there playing the piano cannot stay with you in the same way. So I think you may find yourself pulling slightly apart from the accompaniment, and I think that would be okay for now.
Okay.
But try to make sure that that downbeat there on cercando gets a little bit of extra special treatment, and that everything after the comma really looks to that point. Soltanto ito cerca. And then the ornament where you look around makes a little bit more sense if that gets special treatment and special highlighting. Would you do just that first bit, and then I promise I'll let you go ahead this time.
Okay.
One, two.
Son tanto, 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 son tanto io cercando. Che pur al fin trovai, colei che desiai, duramente pendando.
Good. Let's stop there while we're there too. That lovely drawn out gesture on duramente that first time. Duramente. Yeah, you're doing a thing where the tone is falling back just a little bit before it reemerges out of the texture a little bit. I like that shape very much for that, but I don't know that I don't know that it serves the word duramente in the way that we might think of it. What's your understanding of that word as you're thinking of it in relationship to the piece? How would you translate that?
It's like severely, like duramente penando, like severely suffering.
Yeah, yeah. Your suffering lasts long enough, but it does kind of tend to go away before that gesture that ascends up to the high D. What if it started almost with a little bit less tone and didn't really begin growing until the bass part dips down into that low A? You can see the low A in the bass part.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're being tormented by something that isn't actually all that bad at the beginning. But as it goes on and on, it gets worse and worse, and at some point it becomes a little bit unendurable, and that happens with the rise up to the D. And then when you get penando, you get two chances to say that one. I think at least one of those ought to be a little bit vitriolic if you can find vitriol in your mid voice to spin out there. Well, let's try that duramente a cappella, actually.
Yeah.
Durame. I think that's still your pitch.
Yes.
Duramente pennando, duramente pennando.
Yeah, I think that gesture, the thing I'm always trying to do is when there's a florid line or a long held note, or there's a written out ornament or an ornament that I feel like needs to be in the score, I try to always ask myself, how does that illustrate the text? And I try to start in really, basic, uh, really basic language. Does that illustrate the text in some way, or can I adopt that ornament or adapt that ornament in some way to make it work with the text? And if you'll make a strong crystalline gesture on duramente like that, where it goes somewhere rather than something that kind of vacillates back and forth, we're sitting there as audience members saying, "My God, she's held that note a long time. I wonder what's going to happen next." And when the bass part is with it, the tension really does rev up a great deal. And at some point, you're playing a game of chicken with a basso continuo line, and you're the one that finally moves and resolves the tension. And I think that's the role that you want to be in. If you fall away too much, I don't think it has the same sense of unenduring, I mean, enduring forever kind of thing that we're kind of looking for. On the penando, duramente penando, I'm thinking about that, the first one versus the second one. I think the first time you sing penando, maybe give up duramente a little bit since we've already played that chord.
Yeah.
Duramente, funny words to that effect that go on for a bar. Duramente penando. And then maybe the attention gets focused on penando that time. And then you get to put both of them back together in rapid section. Duramente penando as a complete idea. Could you try that little gesture? And then I kind of want to do the same thing in the second strophe in the same part of the piece because you'll probably want to vary what you do the second time around. But let's go with duramente, that same gesture.
Yeah.
Ooh.
The first one?
The first one, yeah.
Duramente pennando, duramente pennando.
That also strengthens that cadence in such a way that it feels very sturdy and very solid, and it's clear to the audience that we're at a boundary point. And you have the score in your mind, so you know there's a definite boundary there on the page. There's markings all over the place that say, "Oh, guess what? New idea, new gesture," in a way. Can we go back to the beginning with the accompaniment, and can you try to do that along with the accompaniment, and see how intuitive you can make it? In many ways, you're trying to fake liveness working with the canned accompaniment, but I think it works, and I think it can be done.
One, two.
Son tanto, 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 son tanto io cercando, che pur al fin trovai, colei che desiai, duramente pennando, duramente pennando. Oh, questa volta sì che ad ogni inganno si addolgono, si addolgono, si addolgono, si addolgono mio danno, mio danno.
Good. And will you just pause your accompaniment there, and we might add the second verse in here in just a minute. For those of you listening in, I don't know what your experience with it is the second time, and I have to imagine that you're sitting there listening without the benefit of the score in front of you, and you're relying entirely upon the oral experience of how it works. Um, my hope is that you're able to hear her making those slight changes with repetitive text. My suspicion is that you probably benefit from even more clarity about the repetition of text, and that Corina could probably do more without it seeming like an unbelievable bad scene, horribly acted or overacted, as we sometimes we've all been guilty of it. Every single one of us that's been on the stage has been guilty of overacting at some point. But I think you could go farther on those repetitive gestures and those repetitive incarnations of words without us feeling like it's something too far. I think your sense of good taste will pull you back in long before you pass that point. So I would encourage you, go up to the mark and maybe run a kilometer on the other side of it, and see what it's like. And we're all good people. We'll let you know if you go too far afield, but I don't think your instinct will probably let you do that. I think you can do it. I loved what you did on Duramente that time, and especially that notion of kind of exploring each word, Duramente, that having its own gesture, penando having its own emphatic gesture, and then marrying the two ideas back together. It's the cardinal rule of rhetoric. You take the idea, you present it, you pull it apart, you put it back together again as kind of a gestalt at the end of the whole thing, which is kind of what you're doing. In this new section that we've not really talked much about, the O's, the repetition of the O's in the beginning of the first section, I think they have to seem, they're too prettily sung. I think they actually have to be questa volta sì. I think it's okay to be a little bit. I think it's okay for those to be a little bit more visceral on the O's. At least one of them, maybe the one at the end of the bar. Questa volta sì. One of them can be a little bit ugly, and I think it would be okay. You're a woman scorned at this point. You might as well enjoy that. And the O can be pretty humanizing, I think, is the notion there. Another question for those of you in the peanut gallery. Do you sense that this section of the piece is in 3? You can yes, no, throw your hands up. It's a little bit hard to get a bead on the meter in this section. And what I'll tell you is Corina is just looking at, something that hasn't had a metronome marking for many, many pages at this point. And she's just got a bunch of whole notes that are looped together. And what it does is it means that our sense of 3 is there, but sometimes it's 3-1, and sometimes it's 3-2, and sometimes it's 3-4. It might even be 3-8 at some point. So there are all these different rhythmic things stacked inside of each other, and her part is very, very flowy back and forth, almost like a dance rhythm that doesn't say deliberate. It's the opposite of a waltz, which is so predictable. There's a lot of Renaissance jumping and running around in the middle of this section of the piece. And Corina, I think you're doing a really great job of showing us those. What I would say to you is there will be places where it feels like there's a downbeat, where it doesn't look like there's a downbeat on the score, but I would go with your instincts and really present that as a strong beat, because then the other things will fall into line behind it. That particularly happens on the S'io non godo sections of the piece. They all start after the first sort of beat of the bar, but they all kind of pulse differently throughout it, and the emphasis keeps moving around. It's not quite Steve Reich, but it's not that far from Steve Reich in some ways. The pulse does feel like it's moving and is flexible. Would you sing the second verse one time? And I'd love to hear you when you approach the mas at the end of the second strophe, as the second strophe ends. The ma probably ought to be a real sense of there's something different coming down the pike. I sometimes joke about pieces having a butt hinge. And what I mean by a butt hinge is you have a block of text, and then you have the word ma or me or aber, and the whole poetry changes from that point forward. It often happens in the B section of a da capo. I'm thinking of Handel's Si tra I ceppi, where you've got C in the A section and no in the second section of the piece. Make sure that we realize that the ma represents a change. And I think I would encourage you to bring the, whatever you do in the previous part, make it technicolor enough that you can contrast it. You can either end dopo lunghi tormenti strong or weak, but however you end it, let the ma contrast with it. You'll notice I'm trying to avoid giving you specific things to do, like be loud here, be soft here. I'm trying to let them evolve a little bit more naturally, so that this can be Karina Bruckner singing it rather than Karina Bruckner jumping through the hoops, which were prepared for her by another person. That way, you have to play with your sense of artistry. We sing that second verse. I think you can just unpause it and it'll work.
Yeah.
Sontali, tali, tali, sontali, qui contenti. Che pur ai fin io provo, che tutto mi rinnovo, dopo lunghi tenenti, dopo lunghi tormenti. Ma tutti con io vo, far non sapranno, chi non gode, chi non gode, chi non gode, chi non gode suo danno, suo danno.
Now, if we were in a live environment, I would probably at this point turn to everybody else in the room and I would ask them to vote, American Idol style, on whether or not the ma was contrasting enough from the dopo lunghi tormenti section. In this environment, it's much harder to measure because we don't have an acoustic to work with or the energy that's in the room. But I was able to hear a definite difference between dopo lunghi tormenti and ma. And I think in a live room, it would probably need to be even more
Even more. Okay.
in order to have the effect. I think that's the goal. This music is like a lot of the music that's 17th century music. You have to bring a lot to it and you have to invest a lot of yourself in it, or it becomes a dusty museum exercise. Or I dare say it becomes catastrophically dull. And I say that as somebody who loves to sing rep from about 1650. That's my real jam spot right there. But you really have to make the repetitions count, and you have to make each of the phrases so incredibly unique that the subsequent phrases can contrast with them as you look at them and as your audience listens to them. Uh, I think that's really the goal in a piece that's so free form like this. This is almost like a blank Sudoku puzzle with, almost no information in, and you have to provide a lot. And your answers will be very different than what I might come up with or what anyone else in the room might come up with. But as long as you've thought about it and you've really engaged with the text and worked to make them contrast from one another and to make a dramatic scene, I think you'll find that your voice has merit, and you're a contender with that. I think that's really a good thing. As we get ready to leave this behind, Karina, I had one question I was going to ask, and I can't think of what it was, and I should have written it down. But what I'll do is we'll probably go back and we'll fiddle with a little bit more. Really good work, and man, talk about scary exposed singing. It's you and a bass line and a language, and everything else is what you bring to the table. And this is a good piece for you to do because it's going to cause you to ask those questions. Thanks for singing, Karina. Nice work.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Really good work. I don't know how many of you have had experience with singing these pieces that are just a continuo line and you, but man, they will show every last part of your soul that isn't quite prepared. It's really wonderful because it lets you engage with the material um, in a way that more composed out pieces don't necessarily let you do. And I think it's essential for kind of building artistry. There's nothing scarier than singing the first verse of a John Dowland song, realizing you have to go to the second verse and there's no text underneath it, and you have to provide your own text underlay. And you say, oh my God, I don't even know what these words mean. It's a different language at that point. That's those questions that this music makes you engage with, the Sudoku puzzle that it presents you with. Boy, for me, that's part of what really awakens a sense of the artist's voice in what you're doing, because you have to provide something, or it's just dreadful and nobody wants to hear it. It's a really great thing to struggle with that music. We're going from the earlier Baroque period to the later Baroque period, where things are just a little bit more fleshed out, and it's not quite so here's some Tinker Toys, go make an aria out of it. But even in Handel, even in Bach, who we think of as being, he's written every last note and everything is special for some reason. Even in that music, there's an awful lot of deference that's shown to the performer. And there's an awful lot of optional things for a performer to kind of work their way through. So I think we've got two Handel arias in the mix, and it doesn't make much difference to me who sings next. I think, could we have Piangero next? I can't remember who was singing Piangero. I've tried to keep myself uninvolved so I don't make any opinions in advance. But who was going to sing Piangero?
Me, I'm singing Piangero.
Would you mind jumping on? I think that was maybe scheduled for the second Handel aria, but if you wouldn't mind jumping in and singing that now, I think that'll make a nice segue into what I'm hoping to talk about next.
Okay, great. I can definitely do that.
I hope I didn't put you on the spot.
No, you're good. Okay. Okay, here we go.
E per così un giorno, per lo fasti grandezze, hai fatto arrivo, Cesare, il mio bel nome, farsi stimpa, Cornelio e Sesto inermi son, ne sanno dormi soccorso. Non resta che la speme morta d'ogni intorno e tiranno e notte e giorno fato spettro agiterò fato spettro agiterò ma poi morto d'ogni intorno e tiranno e notte e giorno fato spettro agiterò fato spettro la sorte mia si credere tanto ria finché vita in petto avrò piangerò la sorte mia si credere tanto ria piangerò la sorte mia si credere tanto
Really beautifully done, Danielle.
Thank you.
That's beautiful work on the piece,
Thank
um,
you.
and really just beautiful work on the piece. Can we break it down into one or two very small things to kind of fiddle with just a little bit? First and foremost,
Yes,
kudos
definitely.
to you on figuring out how to sing a secco recitative with a pre-recorded accompaniment. Just making it through is a gosh is a beautiful thing to be able to accomplish. Um, what I have found to be effective in recitative work when you're working with a pre-recorded accompaniment, and I don't know if it will be helpful, but I'm offering it just as a suggestion, um, would be to read the text um, along with the accompaniment a number of times to get the timing down rather than singing it, and that may be something that you've already done. Um, but what I hear is the spaces between the independent clauses or the spaces between the complete sentences. I kind of find myself wanting them to have a little bit more time. E pur così in un giorno perdo fasti e grandezze. I kind of want a while for that question to go out into the universe before you answer your own question and say, "Ai, fatto Rio." I think it also, it's hard to do because the accompaniment comes along very, very quickly behind you. But I think I would run the risk of skipping through that second bar in the notated version of the score and arriving a little early on grandezze, so that that pause can be as long as it possibly can be. Mainly because I think it's so wonderful to get to sing those exclamatory words like "I" and
Yeah.
"oime" or well, whatever they are in your particular pieces where they come up. I like for them to have their own little moment. Um, it's hard to do, but I think that the idea here is to try to make three different or four different ideas. E pur così in un giorno perdo faste grandezze. Question. Ai, fatto Rio. We don't know what you're so ticked off about until the next sentence. Well, we do, but technically we don't know until you verbalize it out loud. Cesare, and then you're putting the pieces on the board while your situation is so hopeless. And again, the space after ne sano darmi soccorso, plunk, plunk. And then if your oh Dio cannot just slightly violate the first commandment, but if you can shatter it on oh Dio, that might be quite nice. If you're going to take the Lord's name in vain, I think, you might as well go all the way.
Go big or go home.
Go big or go home. Yeah, exactly. Because even if the guy that's in the back of the room, checking his Facebook while you're singing the recit, even if he's not paying a bit of attention, he'll know something's wrong between that chord and the way that you deliver that chord. That's going to be hard to do with pre-recorded accompaniment, but I think it is doable. Okay. So I would keep working with the timing on that. And for me, those are the things that in a performance, I'd really, those are the things that bring a smile to my face. Almost as sure as your recitative, or not your the return of the A section when you dipped down into the lower octave before you went, that just brought a smile to my face. It was just such a wonderful, unexpected, and really subtle but exciting ornament. So I would continue to fiddle with those recits. I can tell you when I go on a gig, whether it's oratorio work or cantata work or early opera, I know that if I have 5 arias in a show, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about how many recitatives I have.
Right.
And that's where I know that I'm going to be spending my time cuddling up to the continuo team, because that's where we're going to be spending our time, is trying to find the timing for those and working that. So 6 arias, rehearsing that in 45 minutes doesn't scare me at all. Rehearsing 2 recits in 45 minutes, that kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies just right out of the gate, because I know there's a lot to coordinate in those. So I think you're doing good work with that. I really think you're doing good work with that. In a live situation, I think you'd have so much freedom there. And so when that returns, just, really realize what a sacred thing that is when it's a possibility again. Really, really nice work. So on the recit, try to make sure that question makes it out into the universe long enough to resonate before you come back in with your I, and then that oh Dio. If there's any way to offset that in such a way that it's unregal for a queenly woman to say that word out loud, I think maybe that's the thing to do at that point. If you can find a way to make it work. At least for me, I know that's what would grab my attention and shake me around a good bit, which is what I'm always looking for in these arias anyway. In the aria, really beautiful work. The sense of line all the way through the piece is in such beautiful. It's so beautifully and lovingly rendered all the way through, and I think I'm really happy about that. I think what I would ask you to begin playing with, even the first time around, would be the sense of varying the phrase length ever so slightly. Try to figure out when your character is ruminating on a particular word. That piangero thing at the beginning, you say it the first time and it's just a standalone sentence. The second time it's part of a much longer idea. Piangero la sorte mia. And it's about, not just fate, but whose fate? Oh, yeah, guess what? Me. I'm the one in the driver's seat here. Really, that whole first page is there's very little subtle stuff to do there except for just make a declamatory sentence out of it. And then you begin to really get to ruminate with the nuts and bolts. Piangero, piangero. And I liked what you did with the octave, especially because it felt like you were going to piangere and then you were going to piangere one more time. And then the idea did go on, and it was kind of a surprise, like we were pulled back into reality about your sorte mia.
Mhm.
I could you sing the first gesture of piangere a cappella at the beginning? I'll give you a pitch here from the piano so you don't have to mess with it. And I apologize for my abysmal keyboard skills. Piangere. And can you experiment with the idea of the whole aria being self-contained in that first minor third? And then the idea goes on in the second one with a much longer idea. You're already doing it somewhat, but I think give a little bit more input to Mia. You're feeling sorry for yourself and not for bad reasons by any stretch of the imagination. Would you try that just without the burdens of an accompaniment?
Yeah.
I like that line a lot, and you realize that your Mia is going to get overtaken by the violins at some point when you do this with orchestra. So you'll really be able to sing all the way through that Mia a little bit more than you would with a piano, because they're going to push you out of the way and try to steal your light.
Okay.
I think the sense of messa di voce over the first piangero could still be even. I think it could be even more shapely, and it wouldn't seem mannered, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Maybe a little bit more on the je, and then when you sing on ro, rather than thinking of ro decrescendoing, I think crescendo through it for at least part of the 3/8 bar, so that it gets that strong verbal ending that it is anyway. Will you try just the piangero by itself?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that has slightly different direction toward it, and the strong syllable doesn't seem like a weak syllable now.
Right.
And that's one of the hard things about this. The downbeat really, Handel sets it really well. Just go with Handel a little bit and really let that downbeat be something. Piangero, piangero. I would bring the second one back inside just a little bit. All right? One more time, those first two phrases, and I'll stop monkeying with them because you sing it so beautifully.
Okay.
That leaves you so much room to grow by keeping that full statement inside just a little bit. And then the fiddles come in and they add a layer to the texture that then you play your next card and it begins to grow just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the whole A section really kind of unfolds, for lack of a better term. Now let's get on to the thing I want to ask about. Can we look at the B section?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I would point out that we have a picture-perfect da capo aria here. We have about as many breaks between the A section and the B section as we could possibly have. We have a change of key center. We have some added accidentals. We have a different tempo marking. We even have, we have everything in spades, basically, in this.
It also starts with ma, like you were saying earlier.
and like a cherry on the top of the sundae, we have a ma. We have an enormous butt hinge that happens on that C sharp chord right on the downbeat before you come in. And I think that's the idea. It's going to be hard to do with pre-recorded material, but I think while that play out is going on, you're continuing to kind of self-soothe a little bit as it works its way through. But I think that the spark has to already be there, so that ma poi morta. But when I'm gone, I'm gonna haunt you from every which way, day and night, and I'm gonna make your life awful. I think we ought to know as soon as we hear that C sharp chord and your ma, that this is. She's not just going gently into that night. She's gonna come back, and I think that's the gesture there. Can we just hear a cappella? Ma poi morta, d'ogni intorno, or whatever you're choosing to do. And I don't think those eighth notes have to be straight. You can dot anything you want to in a sequence of eighth notes, and you're not going to make me angry.
Okay.
As long as you don't have fiddles to contend with, you can do what you want. But can we hear that first ma? But can you fake us out? Like you're still hearing da, 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 ma poi morta.
Sure.
Hear it in your head, so you scare us a little, please.
Okay.
You want a fresh pitch? Did I
would
mess the
love one,
tuning
please.
completely up? Here we go. Here's a ma.
Okay.
Ma poi morta, d'ogni intorno.
Already, yeah. We know not to tangle with you now. And we know that this is not just some fragile thing that's, had a bad day. This is a queenly woman that's on the warpath for good reasons. That will immediately set you in a position of power all the way through this. And one of the things that's hard to do is to establish power right from the beginning of the B section, and then to keep pointing the finger all the way through. And I think that's what you have to do, is you have to chronicle in excruciating detail exactly how awful you're going to make their life. And I think that's your job. Let's talk very briefly about the gesture at the end. Fata spetro agiterò. You're doing a little bit of an appoggiatura there. If you wanted to do an appoggiatura on the B nat or the B sharp and a pretty gritty trill, spetro agiterò, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. In fact, we would probably sense that you're very agitated. The fata spetro on the F sharp carries itself through.
Mm-hmm.
But we need something on agiterò. The tormenting thing would be really great there. Then as you approach this business at the end, why don't you do the world's most sloppy trill at that last agiterò before it kind of finds itself into an adagio?
Okay.
I've heard you do trills already and do prepared trills with appoggiaturas beforehand. You've already done them at this point in the piece. I think at that point it's time to play that like a card on the top of the deck and then get all your chips on that last agiterò. Let me give you a pitch there and show you one more time what I'm really thinking. Sorry, I apologize for my piano again and my lack of ability to read sharps. Agiterò. Make the orchestra completely grind to a halt. And maybe give the conductor a reason to say, oh, God. Fata spetro. And then that one you get to do even more, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Can we hear the first one? Agiterò. What you've all just heard demonstrated so ably by Danielle is a wonderful, wonderful prepared trill. She started the trill by excavating an appoggiatura, so she's taken whatever her note is that's written in F double sharp, and she's singing a note that doesn't fit in that harmony in any way, shape, or form, and she is disrupting the waters about as strongly as you possibly could, and then she's not in a big hurry to resolve it. She's taking her time, and it's picking up speed before it finally cadences out. And boy, talk about being able to assert control over the situation. That's what your job, I think, is in that moment. And that chord, it's bad enough in contemporary tuning. I can tell you that chord in a weird, wonky, one of these weird Baroque temperaments that only musicologists talk about, you listen to that chord in that temperament and it will set your teeth completely on edge. And if that resonates through the whole, everybody's going to be waiting to breathe until you let them. And I think that's your job after all. Agiterò. At some point it may become too much. But again, I trust your sense of propriety enough to get in the way and cut that off long before it gets too far down the path. Then on your last Fata Spetro, I think you're going to need to do something more than what you're doing there.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I was
Agitero. You've got this wonderful color in the lower parts of your voice that you ever so briefly intimated in the reprise of the A section. I think I would continue to write some sort of cadential figure on that last agitero that maybe scares us into thinking you might be a contralto.
Ooh, okay.
If you've got it, don't stay away from it just because your Fach designation says you shouldn't do it. I mean, that's leaving things unchallenged. I think I would do a little bit more. The main thing is that it concludes with the same sort of prepared trill so that the orchestra knows where they're supposed to go. Ya, ya, da, with an anticipation, da, and they'll be with you every time, and you won't have to stop and rehearse it, which, you know, conductors hate nothing more than having to stop and rehearse because the singer is doing some singery thing. They just want it to make sense and for you to assert control at the right moment and then to get out of the way so they can do their 5-5-1 and then go back to the A section. I like the way you sing this B section. I think it's possible to put even more vitriol into it and to violate the rule that we were taught in our music history classes that an aria only has one affect. Well, that's a perfectly lovely rule, but Handel is not a rule follower. He's looking to mess with convention as much as possible. And so I think you get to play a part in that and making Handel as naughty as he actually is in that section. As for your ornaments, in the reprise of the A section, they are beautiful and wonderfully rendered, and I don't have anything to say about them except for well done. I don't know whether they're yours or you've kind of mixed and matched like we all do to try to find things that fit our voice, but you found ones that fit your voice very well and very beautifully, and I think they work well. What I would say is no amount of ornamentation is as effective as a beautiful messe di voce. And there was one point where you opted not to do some crazy ornament and you just did a simple one of these. And I think it was just about the most touching thing you could have done, which I think is great. At least one point on your crudeles, I'd love to hear you roll the R in a rather violent, nasty way. Okay. I'll leave it to you to figure out which one of those works the best for you. But when you have a word like that, I at some point I like for it to be onomatopoetic, even if it's not onomatopoeia. Okay. I would find one of those crudeles to make it, to twist the knife just a little bit. Okay. Beautiful work, Danielle. Really beautifully so sung, and I'm excited to hear you work with this more and make these more and more you. Get your Cleopatra smoky eye down, and you'll be in good shape in no time. Beautiful work, madam.
Thank you so much.
Nicely done. I'm going to drop something into the chat here as we kind of make our transition between, and this has given me an opportunity to put some things down on the page that I thought, what are some indispensable tools I could hand to people that would help them feel like they had permission to make this repertoire their own? And what are the things that they need to know, the pitfalls that might jump out at them? And so I'm going to drop into the chat here in just a moment a document that started as a single page and somehow bloated itself into 9 with musical examples that talks about some fundamentals with respect to ornamentation so that you have a couple of toys to go away and play with on your own, but also some thoughts about working from editions. And I'm really glad to see that both of all these editions that I've seen are good editions of the piece. They're not overly edited. Nobody's come along and added too much material into it so you feel like you're doing a game of fill in the blank as you sing the pieces. But some things to keep in mind, and I'll drop that in the chat here in just a moment. That's for you to take. It's a work in progress. If it's helpful, use it. If you have questions about it, please email me. I'm so happy to bore you to tears about the particulars of it. But I want everybody to have something that might be helpful as they work their way through this repertoire. Okay, I'll drop that in the chat in a minute. What else do we have? We have another Handel aria. I can't remember which one it is. Is it Tornami?
Yes, tornami a vagheggiare.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into that.
Great, great. I hope the connection will be smooth here, so let's try it out.
Nicely done, Mary.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
thanks for singing that. Um, I'll say this for you, but also for the folks that are in the room. What we've had here in these two different Handel arias um, are pieces that are written for fundamentally different singers in some ways. The Cleopatra role was written for an Italian singer who came out of the Italian system and was trained in the Italian system. And so Handel puts very little information on the page for Cleopatra. It's a little bit more sparse. Part of that's also the affect of the piece. But he doesn't write a whole bunch of material out for the singer in quite the same way that he does in this particular piece, where the role was created by an English singer. And the singer, if I remember right, was married for a time to Thomas Augustus Arne, who was one of these Handel successors that continues to write in this style after Handel dies in 1659. So by working with a singer who was trained as an actress, but wanting to try to capture the Italianate way of ornamentation, Handel writes things out a little bit more for this particular singer than he does for the Italianate singers. And that's often his practice, even in the oratorios as well. If they're English trained singers, or in some cases they're actresses that become singers, Handel writes it out, and in some cases he just puts a whole note on the page and says, "Okay, you'll figure this out." It's really funny how it works. So what I would say to all of you is you have a chance here to look at what Handel was doing from two different directions. And so, Mary, I think what might be helpful for you would be to go and look at those ornamental passages and to try to think about ways of decomposing them, actually, which I realize that may make a pun, but that's not my main intent to be witty there. It's about trying to look at those long strings of ornamental gestures and to try to look at those and say, okay, well, in that particular line, what's really important and what is ornamental fluff? What's the Christmas tree and what's the ornament? And it's on the amars where we get one chance to begin looking at that gesture, or on vagheggiare. We can look at either one. Vagheggiare is a really long one, and it might be too much to do right here at the beginning. But if we look at that first te solo vuol amar, I'm actually going to share my screen for just a minute, and I think you'll be able to follow my cursor perhaps, and it may be helpful. Here we go. So if we look at the top of page 31 here, you can see there's all this happy business going on. Note that the harmony is stagnant. It doesn't do much of anything within the bar. There's a downbeat with a chord, then there's another downbeat and another chord, and then there's another downbeat and another chord. So there's not a lot of harmonic stuff that has to be dealt with at this particular part of the piece. It's really just this material. So the argument that I would make to you is that the vocal line here in this line is not F, G, A, G, F, F, E flat, D. I think I would probably say that vocal line is probably just an F for a dotted half note. And that the next line is probably just a D for probably the whole bar. And that the next bar is probably an oscillating E, G, E. And then bar after that right here is probably C, E, C, and then A. And if Handel would have been working with an Italian singer, that very well might have been what he would have written in the copyist's edition of the piece. But because he was working with somebody from a different background, he decided to write it all out. So what you have is Handel's idea of what that line would be like if it were written out. So Mary, what I would encourage you to do in this line, and we might sing it, it's not exactly the easiest place to get, but I think if we start at this te solo vuol amar by itself, I think what I would like to do is to take the line apart for just a moment, so that when it gets into this busy business here on amar, so that the line you sing is te solo vuol amar, do you understand what I'm asking you to do?
Yes, sort of like you mentioned before, that first note is the Christmas tree in a sense.
Yeah, and I'm asking you to do only the structural things. For those of you that have to take a music theory class one of these days, and you see that Schenkerian analysis is offered at 8:45 in the morning in your university, I would encourage you to get up at 8:45 in the morning and take Schenkerian analysis, because that's part of what you're doing, is trying to find out, okay, what's the Christmas tree and what's the ornament, and learning how to do that in this musical material. And then when you go back and put back the written notes in place, I think your understanding of what's structural and what's ornamental changes a little bit. So I think I'd like to start at that Te solo vuol amar. And I know it's an awkward spot, so if we need a second or two to get a start at it, I think I'd like to take that line apart. And so it would be like this. And at some point, you do have to do more so that you can cadence. But would you kind of sing that line and take it apart as an example? Here's your F again, Mary. In fact, if you wanted to get rid of the text as well, I think you could for a moment and just sing it on a comfortable, whatever vowel you prefer. Exactly. Would you do that just one more time, just like that, so that those of us who are following along on the screen get a chance to do that one more time? Thank you for doing it so beautifully and keeping it so cleanly. Would you do that one more time like that? Here's an F for you again. Now, I think when you sing it that way, it's a little bit easier to hear which sections stand off by themselves, which sections can be connected together. It becomes very clear that this last little gesture at the end, E, G, E, C, E, C, A, that has to be kind of one gesture all on its own, and that the rest of them can really be kind of split apart in a way. So it gives you some ideas about where in the midst of all of that uninterrupted coloratura you're going to breathe. And at some point, you probably need to breathe for two reasons. One of which, it keeps the tone fresh, and it lets you reassert the fact that you've got the body underneath the support system the way that you need to have it under the support system. And the other is it gives the audience an opportunity to hear how Handel is sequencing this and scotch taping this little melodic fragment on top of itself in different transposed keys. So could we still leave the text out? Te sol vol ma. And can we add just the turn back in that restarts the gesture when it changes keys? And you don't use text like I did. That was a bad example. But would you do that on your own? And I would say, I think you can see my cursor. I think even though you don't need to breathe between these lines here, I think the audience needs to hear the breath in order to understand how the sequence works. So I think what you do is you provide them with an opportunity to follow the line better. And then you don't ration any air. Could you do it one more time? And even if you don't need that breath, will you still just put it in anyway? Just to humor me. La, la, la. Now, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to preserve that sense of that being the underlying theme, but to go ahead and put back in Handel's written out ornamental gestures with all your brilliant coloratura, but to make sure that you pay homage to the underlying melodic line that's there underneath all of the tucks and the frills that could distract our ears from it. And I think you'll find that your understanding of the structure has changed. I know ours has, as the listeners, for sure, and I suspect yours has too. Will you put it all back together again, but make sure you retain that line underneath? Yeah, it becomes a different animal at some point, and you've retained the clarity that you had beforehand, and I think you can even probably find a little bit more to put back into those gestures. But there's some legato that's in there that wasn't there before, and we still have the clarity, which I'm all about. If you can get legato and clarity at the same time, please do. And if you have to throw one under the bus, throw clarity under the bus and go for legato every time. Then on the trills that you do here, you're starting on the note, and then you're trilling, and then you're trilling out to the next gesture. And I think I would encourage you to put a little appoggiatura in instead. Da 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 dum ba da 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 dum ya ba da 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 dum ya, so that the appoggiatura disrupts everything, and there's a reason for the trill other than it's fun to do, which, you know, that's a perfectly good reason to trill. I'm not somebody here to rain on your parade, but it's nice when the trill is rooted in some disruption, so that it becomes not just fun, but it becomes cheeky fun, and I'm all about being cheeky. Could you take it and pull it apart and then try to smash the harmony ever so slightly with a little bit of F in this E flat space before you trill, and a little bit of E flat in this D space before you trill? Can you try that? If it doesn't work, it's fine. It's kind of scary to do this in front of other human beings, I know. I think you have the germ of a different way to sing this passage here that becomes really playful. The other was plenty playful, but this is really interesting to listen to, and I think it lets the audience follow the coloratura and see how the trick is done, which, you know, that's the magic of some things, is them knowing how the trick is done and showing it off to them. I think continue to play with the timing between these notes. And I think if you'll play with that timing, you'll find something that feels perfect for you. The same thing that we've just done can be done on this incredibly long 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bars of other, you know, trilly nonsense that Handel's written out here for you to do in this section too. And I think what I would say to you is look at the chord that's underneath, figure out whether the first note of the bar matches the chord as it is, and think that that might be the primary note in the line, so that the line isn't ya ba da da ja ha 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 ha. The line is actually rather boring when it's uncomposed. C all the way through the bar, C all the way through the second bar, D through the second bar, D through the second bar, E flat, E flat. I think you see where I'm going with that. I would pull that line apart and sing it enough times that your brain says, oh my God, I get it already. And then put the ornamented gestures back in while you retain that sense of rooting in that other business. Does that make some sense?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. It's a totally different style the way we worked on it, so I really like it.
One of the reasons why I'm so happy that you've chosen this piece is because it's one of those examples that gives us Handel having composed the ornamentation out. And then we have to go from the other direction, and we have to decompose the piece to figure out, okay, what would Handel have written if he was just going to trust the singer to ornament without doing anything else? That said, you can re-ornament on the B section as much as you want, and we might talk about that in our lessons together. But what I would say to you is that on pieces like this, the ornamentation the second time around, it's probably a lot more fun in a piece like this to keep the harmony preserved and sing other notes in the harmony and change the directions of the lines rather than to try to keep adding frills in where you've already frilled yourself crazy in the first time around. And we might work on that on our own. But it has to do with kind of singing notes that are still in the harmony and changing the line up, changing the rhythm up, and in a way kind of recomposing. It's free harmonization in a different way. It's very un-French, and it's very Italian. That's what the Italianate ornaments do, and it's not what the French ornaments do. Piangero has a little bit more French in it. This has a little bit more Italian. So there's a lot to do there. Really nice work on this. I think that demonstrates what I hope would be helpful there in that section of the piece. Do you feel like you've lost the legato, or you've gained legato by decomposing and putting it back together?
I think I've gained more legato and more flow, and there's also more comfort when I sing it.
My hope for you is that on the other side of taking this piece and tooling it a little bit like that, that it's a very flashy piece, but it doesn't cost you anything to sing the piece. It's actually very easy. And when it's a series of, carefully organized hoops that you have to jump through, it's really difficult. And when it's just kind of gesturally based like this, where you've got that sense of legato and the understanding of the structure of the piece, it actually becomes very easy to sing. And, you can devote your brain power to something else, like a shopping list, or to the acting and the blocking that you're supposed to be doing, or all of those other things that we have to do in this field and multitask. And I think a piece like this can be really good because it forces you to learn it in such a way that you free that up, and then you can do this all day long while you're also, doing other things. And I think that's the goal, is that this piece should cost you nothing. You should be ready to sing it again as soon as you get on the other side of it. And I think this helps move you toward that a little bit. At least that's my goal. We could get ourselves into plenty of other trouble, but I think I want to make sure that I leave some time for people to ask questions if I've said something that they want to ask about, or if I've said something inherently stupid that they want to challenge, which is perfectly within your right. But yeah, I would be interested in knowing what things you've heard, or things that I can clarify to be a little bit more understood, if that's helpful. Remember, you're really not going to step on my toes. Jacob.
This isn't so much a clarification question. It's more of a question for what kinds of early music would be the best for, people who think they have bigger voices to sing, because I know a lot of it is very lots of melismas, super quick and light, and it's hard for, bigger voice people to find repertoire that they feel comfortable in. So I don't know if you have any suggestions.
That's a fantastic question, Jacob. A really fantastic question. And there was a time in I'll talk about it like it's a thing, in the early music community. It's not really that formal, where there was this thought that, bigger voices didn't show up until about, 1920 or something like that. I don't know when they thought that larger voices showed up, which is complete nonsense. We know that there have always been voices of different dramatic characteristic and dramatic weight. And when you begin looking at the repertoire, you find that there are particular singers that are named that had particular qualities associated with their voices. Of course, the castrati are incredibly well documented because they were the rock stars of their days. But there's also this wonderful wealth of other voice types that amazing musical material was written for and that should be explored, that you can find that fits the characteristics of your voice. But it does require some digging. This is the strategy that I would encourage you to use. For those of you that have those larger voices, one of the first places to go is to snag a Handel oratorio. It doesn't even have to be Messiah, although I would encourage every single voice type to learn the piece because somebody's going to pay you to sing it at some point, regardless of what. You could be a Helden tenor, and you're going to get to sing Messiah at some point and get paid for it. So learn the arias and get it figured out. But to pick a random Handel oratorio out and look at the parts that are written for your voice type. Just go to the library, pull one off the shelf, and just take it to the practice room and live through it. And if you can find in there a single aria that fits your voice type, you've done what you need to do. Then the next thing to do is to say, okay, that tenor aria worked very well. Now you need to find out who sang that aria in the original performance. Who did Handel write that aria for? And once you've done that, the world is your oyster. You know that singer's name, and you can go plug that singer's name in and find out every single role that was written or created by that singer. And you've just cracked open an enormous repertoire world in front of you. For me as a countertenor, I was not a high falsettist like some of my colleagues. I preferred the grittier lower repertoire. I'm more comfortable singing contralto and low mezzo repertoire than high fluty stuff. And it took me a while to figure out, oh, if I look for things written for this particular singer, they fit my voice very well. And things written for Senesino don't fit my voice very well. But things for Gaetano Guadagni work very well. It's the same way with the mezzo-sopranos that Handel wrote for. And I know that if it was written for a particular mezzo, I can sing that. The one that he created Handel, he created Solomon for. That fits my voice very well. The things in other oratorios for a different singer, they don't even remotely fit. In fact, they're wretched. They're awful. So I would say that you're going to be able to find a singer somewhere in there that has that larger characteristic. For Handel's repertoire, particular singers you might look at as a tenor, and as a tenor with some color in the middle. I would really encourage you to look after a guy named Mr. John Beard, who Handel wrote a lot of things for. But it's all about finding the one thing that you say, oh God, this feels really good. This piece from Matthew Passion fits my voice really well. Who was it written for? And then that's the key that you use to unlock the repertoire place, to find that repertoire more and more. The other thing I would say is go back and listen to the singers singing this repertoire from 50 or 60 years ago. My favorite Giulio Cesare is not the latest, hottest, crazy avant-garde period performance of it. It's the one with Christa Ludwig. That's the one that I love and adore. And to say that was a tinny little early music voice is, that's not truth. That's not truth at all. That was a 19th century voice. And find those singers singing that repertoire, and you'll probably also be able to find things that work for you. If you love Jussi Björling, go find Jussi Björling singing Matthew Passion, and figure out which of those arias work in that recording of it, and then start exploiting that repertoire. It doesn't matter to me what weight voice you have. I think you should be singing this repertoire, and realize that dramatic voices were not an invention of last week. They've been around. Monteverdi was writing for large voices. We know that. So was, of all people, Giulio Caccini. The rooms may have changed and the instruments may have changed a lot, but full-blooded singing as we think of it is not an invention of last week, as I said. Great question, Jacob. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it really does. Thank you so much.
If you want, I'll send you a list of things to just put on your Spotify list, and I'll bore you to tears with it if you'd like. But
I would love that.
In my mind. Any other questions? I know we're just a moment over, but
I just had a quick question about. Yeah, I had a quick question about the use of straight tone in early music singing and when it's stylistically appropriate, like if it's well supported and everything. But just what your thoughts are on straight tone in early music singing.
It's a really controversial issue, and even those of us within that community of people who are practitioners of that art form come to blows about it at some point. What I will say is there was a time when the thought is that everything was straight tone and that vibrato wasn't invented until, Hindemith or somebody really late. I would disagree with the notion that this material needs to be sung with a straight tone. I believe that every healthy tone, even if it's very minuscule to where you can barely hear it, every healthily produced tone that's free has the possibility for vibrato in it. Now, it may not be very much, it may be so small that you might not even be able to hear it as a listener, and you'd have to measure it with a machine. But I believe that there's vibrato in that note anyway. There's a natural oscillation. We also noted in the Baroque period that the addition of vibrato came with the addition of volume, but also was considered to be an ornamental gesture as well. And so I wouldn't say, I would say the addition of vibrato, and you might even go so far as to say additional wobble, is an ornamental gesture in this music. But I would kind of stay away from the notion of straight tone singing, at least in the operatic and oratorio repertoire. Anything outside of church music, which we know had a fundamentally different ensemble. Nothing scares me more than being called to do a Chichester Psalms, because of the fact that that's not really a countertenor part. That's for a boy soprano. I ain't no boy. You can tell by looking at me. I'm a stocky, middle-aged, bald guy. I'm not pulling the wool over anybody's eyes, and it doesn't fit my voice very well. And the problem with it is that it needs, that piece is engineered to have that straight tone sound. Some church music is engineered to have that sound. But that being said, I don't think it has to. I perfectly love hearing Thomas Tallis sung by singers with some nice wobble in the voice, and sung by, you know, not boy trebles. I also like it sung by boy trebles. But for me, if it's good art in the first place, it can be transferred to a different context and to a different set of instruments or to a different fundamental group of players and still have merit. If it's good art, it can survive that transplanting process. And even if it's bad art, it still pretty well survives that process in some cases. So yeah, the straight tone thing, I would say at the very least allow for the possibility of vibrato in every note, even if it's small. Allow for the possibility. I think that's more than anything else. That way it's not constrained. And, you know, if you want to add more, then make it an ornamental choice. But the minimum allowed possibility is what I think you want to try to strive for, at least to keep the tone healthy. Some of you may be shocked to say, some early music person just told me that I can wobble in all my pieces. And I'm saying, yes, but please don't quote me on it. How's that for a shot across the bow? Any other questions? As always, you can email me, and I'm so happy to talk your ear off about this stuff. And I'm conspicuous and easy to find. A thank you to the three of you who sang so beautifully, and in many ways acted almost as much as an example out of a textbook as anything else. I really appreciate it. Beautiful work, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. This has been amazing. I loved how you deconstructed things and then built them back up for us. I learned so much. So thank you. And thank you all who joined us on the live stream.